I'm in front of the middle school. I'm a middle school life group leader. I also occasionally work in parking. And most of the time during this hour, I'm over in 56, going with the 5th and 6th graders, hanging out with them. But Luke asked me to preach for you guys today, which I'm excited for because, like I said, I'm usually doing middle school, but this time I get to preach to a more mature audience, right? In middle school, I'm preaching to them, and I had to kind of I had to force myself to stay surface level because their understanding is only so deep, But for this sermon, I'm excited because I'm more of a deep person. I like to get deep in conversation, and with you all, I have the ability to do that. So I hope that if you bear with me, we can go into a deeper topic and talk about some things that really, I hope, mean something and kind of stick with you guys a little bit. I'm excited for this, the high school stuff. So just kind of opening up, who here, show of hands, considers himself to be sort of a detail-oriented person? A show of hands. Some of us, a couple of us. My fiance is back there raising her hand for sure. I agree with that a little bit. Okay, for those of us who raised our hand, or even if you didn't, what are some things, like details that you pick up on, usually? It can be whatever. I don't know if you're in a, help me out. You guys got something you guys focus on first? Maybe it's if you got a line of pencils and the one's kind of off to the side a little bit, it's like you just, boom, right there, you see it, you notice it, and you got to fix it real bad. Okay, kind of you guys with me a little bit? Those who are more detail-oriented tend to pick up on distinctions faster. Distinctions, things that are different, right? Things that are out of place. For instance, if you're in a store and they're playing music in the background and you can't really hear it, but you can clearly pick out like a second of the song, and then you can tell me exactly what the song is. I used to do, when I worked at Meyer, I did that a lot, where I couldn't really hear the music that well, but they'll play a little jingle or something of it, I can hear it, I'm like, oh, that's this song by that guy. Sure, got it, no problem, but just for the little split second that I heard it. Or, is anyone here particular about textures? Like softer or blankets, whatever, they have a certain kind of blanket or whatever. I know Danny's not here. Danny's one of the life group leaders for high school, for the freshman boys. Me and him the other day had a conversation, a much deeper conversation than I thought it was going to be, about, it was a multi-tiered order of things that a t-shirt had to meet, a bunch of requirements, right? So like he was talking about had to be certain level of flexibility and breathability, and had to be able to be soft, but not too soft because then it falls apart, and has to be, he went on this whole thing, and I was just like, but he's very particular about his textiles, apparently, right? He's detail-oriented, he cares about that kind of stuff. Or about foods. At my house, I am the mashed potato tester. When we make mashed potatoes, my brothers, my mom, whoever's cooking, says, hey, get in here, I need you to find out, and I'll taste it. I'm like, oh, it's too salty, or it needs more salt, or more milk, or more butter, or whatever it is. Like, I'm that guy, because I'm apparently particular about mashed potatoes. So some of us are particular about things. Those who are particular pick up on distinctions, things that are different, faster. But I want to talk about this word distinct. So this is non-rhetorical. I need some feedback here. What does the word distinct mean to you guys? Yell something out. Different? Yes? What else? Distinct. Same thing? Different? Okay. Distinct can mean recognizably different, right? It's kind of obvious, or it stands out amongst the crowd, or it's unique, something that is distinct. So this series we're breaking into, this is a new series, and Luke had me open it up, and I think Chaz is going to be with you guys next week. Who here knows Chaz? He has a tech usually in the back. He's a pretty cool guy. Yeah! He's my partner for the life groups in middle school. I love him a lot. He's pretty cool. And he had a big play into this series because he's really passionate about this idea of a relationship with Jesus. But in this series, we're going to be talking about how you guys, us, I guess, as Christians, are a unique set of people, right? We're distinct. We stand out from the rest of the world. But today, in this first lesson, we wanted to talk about kind of the source of that. The source of our uniqueness is the one who came, who stood out quite a bit, right? And that's the one we call him Jesus, right? We're talking about Jesus today. So Jesus, as a person, some say that he was a good man, and then he died, and that was it. End of story. Close book. Some say that he was someone who taught and did great things. He was a teacher, which most people know him as a teacher. But then that was pretty much the end of the story. He was a good teacher, like a wise man, and that was pretty much it. Some don't believe he existed at all. I have a friend, a coworker, who says, well, I wasn't there, so you really can't prove that he's real. Sure, okay. But then some of us, I hope, we believe that he existed and thought that he's pretty different than anyone ever before. All right? So my question to you guys, and so far non-rhetorical questions have not worked out well for my favor, so we're going to go with rhetorical. Who is Jesus to you guys? All right, be thinking of that. And when you're thinking in your head, I don't want you to think like, what's the answer that I've heard in church or someone's told me, or I don't want you to think even like the right answer, right? I want you to think about the relationship you have with Jesus specifically, your unique relationship, and be thinking about who he is to you. If you didn't have church or maybe even the Bible and all you had was your relationship with Christ, who would you say he was to you? That's kind of one thing I want to think what you guys have been thinking about right now. And as you're thinking maybe some of the things that he did, some of the things that he's done for you in the past. And there were a lot of unique things, distinct things, right, that Jesus did. He forgave sins that only God could forgive, which that's one of the big reasons that he got famous, not just because he was forgiving those who sinned, but also the Pharisees, a group of biblical scholars of the time, knew that only God was the only one who could forgive, and here comes Jesus around saying, you're forgiven, you're forgiven, you're forgiven, and they gave him a bunch of crap for it. It's like, only God can do that, right? But he claimed to be the Son of God, so as a Son of God, he kind of has that authority to do so. And he performed miracles under that authority, and he said he was the Messiah, which is kind of a big like buzzword in that time of the Jews. And if you ask the Jews now, it's still a buzzword, but they've been waiting for this Messiah, this figure who's going to come and save them all, and he's claiming to be that person. So it's a big deal. Messiah being the Savior that God promised through the Old Testament prophets, right? So you're thinking about who Jesus is to you, and I want to tell you guys a little bit of for me personally, why Jesus stands out. And it's not necessarily a story, it's a story about him. It's found in the Bible. But I just want to read it for you guys. I don't have it up on the screen. I just want you guys to listen to kind of hear the story. So early in the morning, he, being Jesus, came back into the temple, and all people were coming to him. He sat down and began teaching them. Now the scribes and Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery. They made her stand in the center of the court, and they said to him, "Teacher, this woman has been caught in the very act of adultery. Now in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women to death. So what do you say to do with her? What is your sentence?" And they said this to test him, hoping that they would have grounds for accusing him. But Jesus stooped down and began writing on the ground with his finger. However, when they persisted in questioning him, he straightened up and said, "He who is without any sin among you, let him be the first to throw a stone at her." Then he stooped down again and started writing in the ground. They listened to his reply, and they began to go out one by one, starting with the oldest ones, until he was left alone with the woman standing there before him in the center of the court. And straightening up, Jesus said to her, "Woman, where are they? Did no one condemn you?" And she answered, "No one, Lord." And Jesus said, "I do not condemn you either. Go. From now on, sin no more." That story stands out to me, I think, because people just don't do that nowadays. All right, we live in this, everyone understands, I hope everyone knows the word, the phrase cancel culture that we live in right now, where if you're a celebrity, or even if you're not a celebrity, if people will dig and try to find dirty laundry and the things of your past that you've done, and they'll call you out by that, and then all of a sudden, every time someone mentions your name, that thing is associated with you. Regardless of all the other things you've done, they call you by your sin. And so that's kind of what they're doing with her in the story. She gets caught in the act of adultery, which in my head is as clear cut as someone walks into a room and sees it happening and basically just takes her and drags her out into the court and throws her in there and says, "Bam, we got a sinner here. What are we going to do about it, Jesus, Son of God?" And his response is so different. People always like to jump on things and respond in like high intensity stress. And just the visual, Jesus kneels down, like they're "Bam, what you got?" And he's like, "Hang on," and just starts like drawing in the sand. And people think that he was drawing something for the woman, or maybe he was writing something for the people who were accusing her. But I think regardless of what he was writing, maybe he wasn't writing anything. Maybe he was just doodling in the ground. I don't know. But I think the point is that he took a moment to, calm down the situation, right? And so he's doing all that, and they're all saying, what are we supposed to do? And he sits there for a moment, and he stands up, and he's as if he came to some conclusion. He's like, all right, fine. You who are sinless can condemn her for her sin. And then goes back down to doodling again. And he just waits. And he's so patient. No one's patient anymore. No one waits anymore. And one by one, they realize, dang, she got caught and I didn't, but I still sin too. If we're only the ones who have not sinned are supposed to condemn her, then I don't fall into that category. So they walk on out. They leave. And one by one, they leave. First, the oldest, it said, because they're wiser and they know, oh yeah, I sinned for sure. I'm out of here. And then even the Pharisees begin to leave. And now all that's left in the room is Jesus and the woman. He stands up and says, well, where'd they all go? I thought they were coming here to stone you. And she says, they're not here anymore. He says, go. I'm not going to condemn you either. So he not only didn't condemn her, but he got everyone else off her back too. Kind of like a wise man comes into a room and says, none of us can. Leave. And it stands out to me because you just don't see that kind of character anymore in people. But Jesus is a unique and distinct person. That's kind of the point. And to know and understand that he's distinct is more than just reading or listening to these stories, right? It's more than just that. It's that, but it's more than just that. Because another unique aspect of Jesus is that he is timeless. He lives outside of time. So we don't have to just know who he was. We can also know who he currently is. And that's kind of what I want to get at today, is that we can have a current personal relationship with Jesus. The first section I want to start with, first point, I think, is that Jesus is God, right? Which was the biggest and still remains to be the biggest kind of point to prove as Christians, is that this man who is here is actually God and he's our Savior, right? So I'm going to go through that by taking a look at a book that someone wrote about that very point and wrote it specifically for you or us, right? Those who are here today who want to know who Jesus was and who is. Right, the book we're going to look at was written by John. Okay, John when he wrote his book, he writes himself as the one who Jesus loved. Which I don't know if he had some sort of under the table argument with the other disciples and said, I'm actually his favorite, so I'm going to put that in there. But the one who Jesus loved specifically, that's John. Right, he wrote his book to tell Jesus' story, not necessarily who he was, but also who he is. That he exists, and he is who he says he is. And those of us who know the Bible know that it wasn't just John. There was, I think, Matthew, Mark, and Luke who also wrote what we call Gospels, these stories of Jesus. But John specifically tells us a lot in his first opening of his book. In the first chapter of his book, he opens up with this huge, basically, here's Jesus, if I had to lay it all out in a couple of phrases. Okay, so for just a moment, I want to pretend like none of us know who Jesus is, and we're all going to hear about him for the first time. And we found this book that says, The Book of Jesus, and we're going to pick it up and we're going to read it. And I'm not even going to put the verses on the screen. The words are going to be there, but the numbers aren't going to be there because I want to read it like it's a book, right? Like we're going to read it like he intended it for people, okay? So the first section he opens up with, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God himself. So there's the Word, and the Word was God. Word was with God in the beginning. This word thing, right? And word, translated back to its original meaning, original phrase, I guess, is logos. And logos means divine reason. So to me, word is like the active power of God, like the driving force of God. And that's what it was in the Old Testament, was the word logos, the divine reason of God, was this active driving motivation for the universe. It was his power, his essence, his will, his purpose. All that was word, okay? Was logos, okay? Okay, so the next section. He was in the beginning with God, and all things were made and came into existence through him. Not even one thing was made that has come into being. So the word, this essence, this power, right, was there from the beginning and was there for the creation of all this, right? Because before all this, there was no time, no space, and then all that was created. And the word, this power, this essence was there in the beginning of it. Permeates everything. Okay, next section. In him was life, and life was the light of men. The light shines on in the darkness, and the darkness did not understand it, or overpower it, or appropriate it, or absorb it. Okay? So people have been largely blind to this power, this purpose, this driving force, right? To his purpose, his will for us. Okay? So this word is lost on people. Next section. There came a man commissioned and sent from God whose name was John. This man came as a witness to testify about the light so that all might believe through him. John was not the light, but came to testify about the light. So now there's this guy named John that comes into the picture. We got the Word, it's with God in the beginning, and then there's this guy named John who was early on and was talking about how this light is going to come. Now this John is not the John who's writing the book, right? So too many Johns. This John that we're talking about here is John the Baptist, okay? He's not the one who is the light, he says, but he's coming to prepare the way for this light. Okay, so keep that in mind. John the Baptist talking about the Word, okay? So the next section. There it was, the true light, which coming into the world enlightens everyone. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, and those who were his own did not receive and welcome him. But to as many as did receive and welcome him, he gave the right to become children of God. That is, to those who believe in, adhere to, trust in, rely on his name, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of flesh, nor the will of man, but of God. Okay? So God's light, God's essence, God's purpose, the will, the Word, right? It's closer than it's ever been before. It says it enters into the world. So this thing that was always out there kind of driving the cosmos into existence, into doing things, is now in the world. It's an essence that is here. Next section. And the Word became flesh and lived among us, and we actually saw his glory. Glory as belongs to the only begotten Son of the Father, the Son who is truly unique, the only one of his kind, who is full of grace and truth. So now we know that John, the person who wrote this, is talking about a man, because it says he came into flesh and was among us, and we saw his glory. So now not only is the Word been forever, and is this driving power and essence behind everything, but then he came to the world, and he didn't just come to the world. Some people thought the Messiah would come to the world just like this immortal God being that would come, and so it wasn't really man, but was still there. But no, now we find out not only is he here, but he's also flesh, someone who's both divine, because he's been around forever, but also human. Okay? We're almost there. John testified about him and has cried out, "This was he of whom I said, he who comes after me has a higher rank than I and has priority over me, for he existed before me." So John the Baptist, right, the guy who's been saying his whole life, ever since he was born, he had this motivation in himself to talk about this Messiah who was coming. Guys, the Messiah we're waiting for forever is on his way here. And went and talked to all the people about it. People thought he was kind of crazy, but he was the biggest fan of this guy coming from the moment he was born, right? And so now when this Word into the world, flesh, arrives, John the Baptist is like, this is the guy I was talking about the whole time. This is him. This is the one that I've been like, my whole crazy life, you guys thought I was crazy, here he is, right? So last little bit. For out of his fullness we have all received grace upon grace. For the law was given through Moses, but grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has seen God, his essence, his divine nature, at any time. The only begotten God, that is the unique Son, who is in the intimate presence of the Father, he has explained him, right? So this Word that existed for always and ever with God is now arrived into the world and is now flesh, and now he has a name, Jesus, okay? John is trying to give us this continuum of concepts as we can get our way from how Jesus is God, and he starts in the beginning and works his way forward instead of backwards like most people do, right? So his name, this being's name, this essence, this driving force, everything, his name is Jesus. It talks about the law like the strictness, the black and white came from Moses, but this driving force, this true essence, God's real character is now flesh on earth in the form of Jesus. So the takeaway is that this whole time throughout all this, because when you read this, and when I used to read this, I was always very confused as to what the heck John was talking about. The Word was God, Word was with God, Word was there, but then he wasn't, and some other. And the whole time he's talking about Jesus, and he's trying to make his argument as to where he came from and who he is now, and that he is God, right? He existed before his birth, which for us doesn't make a whole lot of sense, like the idea of a human soul existing before he came to earth. But remember, God, Jesus, the Trinity are outside. If this is our universe, time and space, they exist out here. And in this moment, during this time, Jesus said, Jesus said, I'm going to hop into this now, and hops in and was born into our universe, right? Does that make sense? So he was there all along. That's the whole point. That's what Jesus is trying to get across. So Jesus is very much God, according to John, and that's obviously very distinct for someone who was born on earth. But there's another part of Jesus, because I imagine most of us knew that, right? Some of us are nodding off because it's like, yeah, Jesus is Jesus, we got it, we know, right? There's another part of Jesus that it was so obvious that it gets missed for its true impact, I think. So we're going to talk about how Jesus is also man, which you just said that, becoming flesh, everything else. But John 1:14, which is a passage we read through, the beginning of it says, and the Word became flesh and lived among us. And the importance of that, I think, is huge, because God isn't just this thing. The Word is no longer just this abstract concept that exists outside of the realm of our understanding and drives everything along. He's now physically here. Like a woman, Mary, right, his mom, birthed him like a baby, like skin, and it was ugly, and it was raw, and it was very human, right? It was never a question whether he was flesh for those who witnessed him, because they were there and they could touch him, they could see him, they could see as he stepped, dust came up from the ground, and they saw when he spoke, and maybe spit came out of his mouth. Like they could see he was very human. And so it wasn't a big deal for those who were there. But for us, now that he's no longer human on this earth, he goes back to being what he was before, which is this kind of abstract concept that's out there in the cosmos that drives everything along. But I want to explain that while he was here, he lived a life that was so relatable for us and was the reason why he came down for us. Because what does it mean to be human? Now we're getting really existential in here. What does it mean to be human? As humans, we are tempted with sin, right? And Jesus was tempted with sin. When he was in the wilderness, Satan came along and tried to tempt him with things of the earth to go against his Father, as Satan did in the past. Being human. Jesus hurt. He cried. He wept. John the Baptist, the guy we were talking about, his biggest fan, John the Baptist was Jesus' cousin, right? So they were family. And all John the Baptist's life, he was saying, he's coming, guys. Get ready. It's going to be great. And then he goes over to Jesus and says, bro, when are you going to finally come out? When are you finally going to I'm the Messiah? When are you going to start doing your stuff? I'm building you up, man. And comes over here. He's coming, guys. It's going to be great. And he can't reveal him yet because it's not his purpose to do so. It's his purpose to build him up, right? So they had this really close bond. And while Jesus was here on earth, John the Baptist was beheaded. Right? His cousin, the guy, his biggest fan here on earth, gets killed. Or his best friend Lazarus, one of his close friends, killed. And Jesus actually cried. He cried tears. Jesus was human. He felt fear. In the garden before his crucifixion, those of us who know the story, it was extremely stressful for Jesus because he knows what's about to come. Before he's put on the cross, before he's beaten, lashed, just absolute all the evil upon him, which really isn't even the worst part. The worst part was the sin being put on him. But he knows all that's coming, and he's profusely sweating, these drops of like blood coming out of him. He's praying because there's a fear there. This is about to hurt a lot, and I don't want it to happen. Right? He's human. We've all felt fear. He's experienced loss. I talked about John the Baptist, talked about Lazarus. But what about even in closer loss? We know about Mary, his mother. What about Joseph, his father? Joseph was there in the beginning, but we don't hear anything about him ever again. Most scholars think that Joseph must have died early on in Jesus' childhood. So Jesus is now a child without a dad. I think some of us can relate to that a little bit. Having not a dad be there, whether he passed away or decided not to be there anymore. He felt betrayal. Jesus was human. He felt betrayal. People betrayed him. Peter, Jesus told Peter, you're going to deny me 3 times. And Peter said, no, man, I would never do that to you. And then 3 separate occasions after that, Peter's like, I don't know that guy. And Jesus felt that. He knew it was going to happen, but he felt it. It still hurt. Or about the fact that Judas was the one who delivered him to the Romans in the first place. His friend, his disciple, the one who was following along with him through all this craziness, goes and turns him in. Jesus got hungry. That's very human. He was in the wilderness a lot. He was homeless. There was people you drive by on the street, going through downtown Louisville or someplace. That was Jesus. He was homeless. He didn't have a steady home. He worked a job. He was a carpenter, right? Went to work every day, did his thing, had to deal with the responsibilities of that. He was a child once. He was a kid. He ran around. He had to learn how to walk, how to talk. He had older kids who probably tried to bully him, right? He was still human. Jesus bled. He bled actual, blood. He wasn't this immortal being. It's so much true, in fact, that he died, which none of us have experienced yet. But that's a pretty identifying human feature. Jesus was very human. The revelation I had this week going through all that was that different from every God, he was man. And different from every man, he is God. Right? He's both. He's both someone we can relate to and someone that is above us. What is that? If you get nothing else from this lesson, I hope you pay attention to that. Because that was huge for me. Because there's a lot of gods that people worship, and there's a lot of men that people worship, and this is what sets Jesus apart from all of them. Jesus is the most approachable, relatable, trustable, reliable, understandable being there ever was, because he doesn't just exist outside of this. He came down into this mess and lived a life that we can all relate to. I just listed off all kinds of things that surely one of us has cried, one of us has been betrayed by somebody, one of us has lost people, friends, family, parents. He's exactly the kind of friend we'd want because he knows exactly what we're going through. He doesn't exist just outside of all this. He lived in it. And he loves us enough to come to our level, to be outside of this universe and say, all right, I'm hopping in there, and gets into this mess that was never meant to be in the first place. So that way he can experience our pain and he can bear the weight of our sin for us. I'd say that's pretty distinct from the rest of the world today. So knowing all this, what is our relationship with Jesus when we think about him? We'll go back to that question of who is Jesus to me? Who is Jesus to us? Some of us don't really have a relationship with Jesus, and so I hope some of this was food for thought. And some of us know about God and kind of have an understanding of this idea of something out there that's this creator, but has trouble struggling with the idea of God being flesh and here on earth. And some of us have a good relationship with Jesus. We know who he is, understand what he did for us, but maybe are struggling with the how to get that across to people, how to share that, how to share his story. God, through Jesus, meets us where we are. Meets us where it's not past tense. He meets us where we are. So let's work to meet him, right? Get to know who he is. Let's pray. God, I thank you for today. I thank you for this opportunity to learn more about you and your Son and who he was and why he is so distinct from anything that's ever existed. We're so thankful for the word you've provided for us that John wrote in his book and all the other books that exist in the Bible. We have access to the things that we need to have to know who you are. So God, I pray that we get better at doing that, better at getting to know who you are. Because you put so much effort and endured so much to know who we are, so that when we say, you just don't understand, God can say, yes, I do. Be with us this week as we go out here and help us to be better representatives of you. And that starts with just opening up the Word and start reading who you are. I pray that you help us to do that. We love you. We thank you. It's your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Guys, give it up for Zach. Seriously.